Okie dokie then. Good afternoon and welcome to this, the first webinar in the new series of Bob Craig's Teaching and Learning Suite with e-Memoir. This afternoon we're looking at verbal feedback, questioning and differentiation. We like to keep the sessions as interactive as possible, so feel free to use the question or chat facility to put any of your thoughts to Bob, to myself, to all participants. And indeed, if you have a microphone you'd like me to unmute it, just let me know. You'll be receiving a copy of the video recording along with the slides. At the end of the session, you'll have Bob's details there if you'd like to contact him directly to carry on any engagement, and we'll be more than happy to help. I'm going to hand over to you now, Bob. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Marek. And sat in my study in Sheffield at the moment with blue skies outside, so I hope it's nice wherever you are. So we've got about 45 minutes to an hour, and as Marek said, it would be good if people wanted to mic up and ask questions, especially given the nature of the subject matter today about questioning. But as he also mentioned, it's perfectly fine just to listen in or to type your questions. So this is part of a suite. I might say a little bit more at the end, but I'm going to be doing about 10 webinars on different subjects between now and the end of June. Subjects include things like managing inappropriate behaviour from students, how to build resilience, cultivate curiosity, how to have impactful beginnings to training sessions, how to summarise and have effective learning checks and plenaries. So there's all sorts of things, and it'd be good if you could check those out. So to start with the slide, just so we're clear, so the premise of this session, when I was planning it, what I plan to focus on now, really is that most types of verbal feedback are dialogic. So that might be a new word, I'm sure we can work it out. It's really, the idea is that, of course there's times when we give summative feedback to students, to learners, to apprentices. It's about making sure they're clear whether they've reached a certain level of competence, and that's one thing that we do, and that's fine. But this webinar really is about feedback for learning and how the role that questioning plays in that. And the second premise is that skillful questioning leads to thinking and deep learning. I mean, again, that's probably stating an obvious, but there are types of questions where we just want consent from students, where maybe we asked a closed question, a yes-no type question. Again, they've got a valid role to play in what we do, but this webinar primarily is about questions that promote thinking. And the third point, I mean, I don't know if any of you have been recorded recently, either training, giving feedback in different contexts, but we have got everyone has got a default style of questioning. I've listened back to some of my webinars here, and I'm pretty experienced as a coach. Hopefully you'll realise, you'll agree by the end of this webinar that I'm a decent communicator. But when you do listen to yourself, you realise that there's certain patterns, certain habits and certain ways of speaking generally, as well as specifically about questioning. And that's just normal, but the key point is, if we want to improve the way we question, if we want to improve our communication, we have got to become aware of the patterns that we do have and to make changes. What makes teaching difficult? It's really, we're working with people primarily. I mean, again, state the obvious alert, but people are complex. Some are motivated, curious, really keen to learn and keen to progress and resilient, and clearly other students less so. And the thing that I always think distinguishes between a really effective teacher, coach, assessor is their ability to differentiate and to really tune into the other person or people. So just re-emphasising the last bullet point in this webinar, this slide, is we've got to practice what we preach. We as professionals, it's one thing recognising that we could improve things, it's one thing wanting to become more skilled and impactful in the way we ask questions, but the trick is to actually make a plan and to carry out these resolutions that we have. So there's lots of ways to do it, and simple things, just have a note in your diary, or have a couple of bits of paper, or make a note on your session plan if that's appropriate. just write down a few of the questions that we're going to be looking at today and see how they land with students. So I just want to start with a little clip. Some of you will have seen this film. It's only a minute or so. Hopefully it's quite amusing, but it makes some valid points.
In 1930, the Republican-controlled House of Representatives, in an effort to alleviate the effects of the, anyone? The Great Depression, passed the, anyone? The tariff bill, the Hawley-Smoot Tariff Act, which, anyone, raised or lowered? Raised tariffs in an effort to collect more revenue for the federal government. Did it work? Anyone? Anyone know the effects? It did not work, and the United States sank deeper into the Great Depression. Today, we have a similar debate over this. Anyone know what this is, class? Anyone? Anyone? Anyone seen this before? The Laffer curve. Anyone know what this says? It says that at this point on the revenue curve, you will get exactly the same amount of revenue as at this point. This is very controversial. Does anyone know what Vice President Bush called this in 1980? Anyone? Something DOO economics. Voodoo economics.
So we're going to focus on skillful questioning, powerful, impactful questioning. We're going to look at how we use that in different feedback contexts, and we're also going to look at differentiation. But I thought it might be just an amusing but useful way to start the webinar. So it's obvious, isn't it, why that's not a good use of questioning. So you probably don't need me to say it, but it is, isn't it, about there's no pauses between the questions and the allowing the other person thinking time. And whilst we know that, it is something that we're often guilty of. I am, people listening in now will be, that we ask a question and don't necessarily allow time for thought. We don't always try and ask different styles of question, different wording, different intentions in our questions. Sometimes we can be a bit repetitive maybe. So it is about in some way, whether it is recording yourself, whether it is getting a peer, a colleague, just to listen in for 5-10 minutes in a one-to-one conversation or a lesson that you're doing, and just to make a note of the way that you're asking questions so that we do become aware of the habits that we use. So we don't want to engage like the teacher did there. So the key question, obviously, what sorts of questions do promote thinking, learning and motivation, and is this something that you do well? So I'm going to go through maybe 5 or 6 slides on some key principles and share some of my questions that I use and have had a really strong impact in the past. But please, type in, tune in, and share the questions that you use that work well. So these 4 blocks they're all concepts and models in their own right, but they're also principles. I would argue that the principles of really effective questioning, skillful questioning, are inherent in these 4 areas. So the top right, clarify action benefits. This is a really one of my favourite coaching models that I use a lot in a one-to-one and teaching context. And it's fairly obvious, probably from the words, but sometimes we make assumptions about the other person. We assume that we know what their problem is, their challenges are. We assume that they know. And often a good question, its intent is to just clarify what the person's issue is, and don't assume that if they say, I'm struggling, then we come in and assume that because of maybe missed last lesson, it's because that's why they're struggling, but it might be any number of reasons. So it's really helpful just to get some clarity on what an issue is when we're working with people. Action and benefits, so actions, what we've done already, and maybe exploring options and future actions. One of the probably most useful elements of a question is to enable the other person to get a sense of clarity and then to move forward. And benefits is self-explanatory. And clean language we're going to look at shortly. There's a little slide we'll look at there, and we're also going to touch on the 2 other areas. So here's the CAP model that I started explaining earlier. So I'll just leave that on the screen just for a few moments for you to have a look at. So when we're, and this, by the way, these are questions and models that are really useful if we're working with staff, and a lot of you tuning in now have got management responsibilities, and these are just as valid whether we're working with staff, whether we're working with younger learners, whether we're working with ourselves. You know, these are really good ways to get clarity on an issue when we're working through our own issues, problems, and things we want to improve. So I don't want to labour the point, but the clarify is so important. So we're not hearing what we think the student or the other person is struggling with or wants to improve. We actually understand it. We drill down a little bit. Stopcat Continue is both a model. It's drawn from solution-focused coaching, but again, it's also a philosophy that in most situations when we're interacting with other people, if we can help them to recognise, is there anything they could stop doing? You know, what are they spending time on that's not having an impact? What behaviours or habits, attitudes are they demonstrating that isn't effective or helpful in any way? So in other words, what could they stop doing? And again, this might sound obvious, but sometimes when you work with people, I've used this with teams of people that I manage, and none of us probably like doing admin for the sake of it, and no one really likes doing things that are unnecessary. But rather than just moving beyond a good old whinge or getting something off your chest, if we actually drill down and say, okay, so is there something that we're doing that we could stop doing? And then the other two, the start is self-explanatory. The continue is working with that other person in a verbal feedback context or in other contexts and saying, you know, what are you currently doing well, what's working, what is having an impact, and then trying to explore whether there's other situations, other contexts where they could apply the same skills and knowledge and attitude that they're doing in this context. So again, I think to me that's one of my favourite models. It really works in just about every situation with other people. Could you stop doing something? What different things could you have done, and what will you continue doing? Clean language. So again, I don't know if some of you will have heard this phrase, but it is a concept as such. So if you're interested in these issues, you can go online and find out a bit more about clean language. So the example I've given, people say things like, I'm running up against a brick wall, or you know, it's like a battlefield, or my head's like a bowl of spaghetti, or whatever the other person says in that conversation, that feedback situation. Just tune into the words that they're using. So when they say, I'm coming against a brick wall, then maybe think about the 3 questions on the left. Where is the wall? When does it feel like there's less of a wall? When are these feelings more or less intense? And clearly what we're trying to do there is understand the other person and not make assumptions about them. We want them to feel listened to. We want to, maybe the wall is the psychological wall. There's stuff going on in their head that they can't quite work through. Maybe it's some sort of practical issue. They just haven't got access to the resources or the materials that they want. Maybe the wall is something that's going on at home or with a colleague or something else. So just reflecting those words back to the other person helps them to feel understood, helps them to feel listened to, and enables us to agree some sort of progress beyond the wall, over the wall, around the wall, through the wall, whatever's appropriate. Whereas on the right, I'm not suggesting we shouldn't ever use humour and banter. You know, I'm quite big on banter, and sometimes you might say, "Oh, you'll get over it, mate." You know, that sort of punned and humorous response is appropriate sometimes, isn't it? But maybe after using the pun, you know, "Don't worry, mate, you'll get over it," then explore, get back to the wall itself, and we might actually discover things about the other person that we didn't otherwise know, and we can help them to make progress with an issue. So that's clean language. This idea of timeline questioning. So it's just another, it's a model in itself, but it's another thing for you to have in mind when you're giving feedback, when you're having a conversation with someone that you manage or a student or apprentice. It's one of these things that apply in most situations. So there's loads of questions you could ask about the future. You know, by next week, in 6 months' time, how will you use the skills that you're learning now? What difference will it make? How will it benefit you? You know, in 3 months' time, when you've got beyond this current challenge, or you've got these new skills, what will other people notice about you? So what you're trying to do, we do a lot of work on smart targets, and smart targets are necessary, and the opposite of smart targets are vague, woolly targets, which are no good to anyone. But smart targets on their own don't really make a difference. It's not going to help someone to act just by whacking a smart target in front of them, or filling a box in, or putting something on Pro Monitor, or whatever system you use. You know, the students need to, the people we're working with need to really engage with that particular target. So these future questions can be really compelling. It can really help someone to visualize themselves carrying out a skill, seeing themselves in a year's time in the workplace, in a different situation, using these skills, using whatever it is we're talking about. Another good, how will you know? If that's not a question you use now, that's a great question to use would be, how will you know when blank, when you are making progress? You know, what will the signs be that you're finding this easier now? And then you can ask the questions similar to what I just said before. So not just how will you know, but how will other people know? What will they notice about you with this new confidence, this new skills and abilities that you've got? So that can be really powerful for some people. You know, in some fields like sport, they're particularly good at this, using, you know, in therapy and also in business, all sorts of contexts where that future-orientated questions can be really motivational. And then some sort of past questions. You say, you know, when have you done this well? When have things been working more effectively than they are now? What have you done in the past that's similar to this? So we really help people to draw their resources, draw on their past experiences from the past, and bring those to the present situation. Because we forget things, don't we? You know, I've done many things. You guys listening in have done loads of things in the recent and distant past that you just forget about. So if someone says, you know, when have you done some sort of similar activity that we're looking at here? And then all of a sudden you might get that light bulb moment and say, oh yeah, I remember now. Yeah, a couple of years ago and then they start telling you about things, and then you just say, oh, it's a maybe one or two skills or one or two things that helped you to get through the difficult times then that you could learn from and bring to this present situation. So future makes people visualize and makes the image compelling. The past helps them to access their prior learning and experiences. And then the key to it all, really, the reason we're doing that is to get the person to just focus on the now. Okay, so what is the smallest step, or what is the first thing you can do now to make a start, to make progress? So I think these are really powerful questions. Here's some of my bestest, my favourite questions, just for what it's worth. And I'll just leave them on the screen just for a few moments for you to have a look at, and feel free to type your own or let me know of your own favourite questions. So it's this, you know, smallest steps and first steps. If you're not hearing yourself using these questions, then try it out, because it's really motivational. If having a conversation with a student or a group, and what we're trying to do, maybe we have the big picture and the got them to visualize in 12 months time or whatever, but really it's then about what's the smallest thing you can do today or within the next 48 hours. How are you going to make a start with this? We want to build that confidence and momentum in students. So that's a good question. Who does this well? That gets people stepping out themselves, looking at other people that they know, could be celebrities, could be family members, ex-students, and trying to model, trying to learn from what people have done well. Not, if you just say who does it well and then name someone, there's limited learning in that. But if you then say, what can you think of one thing that they do, and that's when you begin to help people to gain that clarity. Is this fact or opinion? This is always a good sort of question, but particularly in the current era of Trump and other people sort of saying that anyone who disagrees with me is fake news, and that's clearly disturbing. The whole sort of political agenda at the moment about saying economic forecasters may get it wrong a lot, but experts generally, people who have dedicated themselves to a specific area, shouldn't be dismissed as. So we want students to express opinions sometimes, don't we? So we're not asking that as a finger wagging and critical question. We want them to express opinions, but we also want them to distinguish between information and ideas that I've got either factual or the more evidence-based, even if we want to critique that evidence sometimes, but is this just someone's off-the-top opinion, or has it got some sort of basis in fact? And what did you notice about this? Personally, I won't want to get too into this because some of you won't maybe be interested or know much about it, but I'm sort of researching myself, mindfulness and things like that, and really mindfulness is about just noticing things. And if we can help students to notice their own thought processes, how they talk to themselves, how they behave, notice other people's responses, just that principle of noticing rather than always necessarily judging and engaging and criticizing and talking too much. Just good questions sometimes say, what did you become aware of, or what did you notice about that? And finally, I don't want to skip through all of them. Oh, two more I want to mention. This is a question that's a bit weird, but can have a really powerful impact. When a student or someone else says, I don't know, so you ask them a question about something and say, I don't know. If you come back with, if you did know, what would that look like? Or if you did know, what advice would you give? Or it sounds a bit odd because they've just said I don't know, but actually that can be a really powerful question because it's helping the other person to step out of themselves almost, because they might think that their knowledge is not valuable or they haven't got it right sometimes, or they lack confidence in their views. If you say, well, if you did know, or if you were someone else, what would you tell them? And that just stepping out of themselves can be really powerful. And then the one in bold at the end, personally, this is probably the question I use most, and it's my favourite question, what else? So you ask someone a question, and often the first response is a bit superficial, a bit generalistic. It's the first thing that's on top of their heads. And if you just say, what else, then they sort of have to, you see the other person just often pause a little bit, and then they have to go deeper and access, think a bit more basically, rather than just the first thing that comes into their mind. So that's a fantastic question. I urge you to use that one more often if it's not one that you use at the moment. Another great way, some of you, if you've tuned into my webinars before, it's one of my, I use this slide a bit in different contexts, because if we're giving feedback to learners, apprentices, if we're using questions, then sometimes it's really helpful to actually see what it is they know and what it is they don't know, to see the connections they're making. And if we just have verbal discussions or people are filling boxes in or bullet pointing, we don't really get a deeper sense of the students' understanding of their what they're connecting, and whereas if students are doing timelines and flowcharts and mind maps and graphic organizers like the 4 examples I've got on the screen now, then it's a great way for us to give them quick, in the moment feedback for improvement. So you can look at one person's flowchart and say, you put yours in the order of 1, 2, 5, and the other group have put 5, 2, 3. Just go and have a conversation with them about the your differences in opinion. So graphic organisers are really, they're creative, they are testing higher order, even if it's lower level students we're working with, it's still testing higher order skills, and it's fun, and it's, students are owning the creative process as well as the actual content. And so I would, if it's not something you thought about too much, I would come back to that and give students templates to fill in rather than boxes and overusing bullet points. I can't hear you now. I'm guessing some of you may be groaning now because Bloom's taxonomy does get reeled out a lot in training organisations and teacher training courses and things of that nature. But, it's a fantastic model. It's a great way to think about the way we question students. It's a great way to think about the way we set tasks and objectives and so on. So I'll just leave it up there in case you haven't come across this before. So the idea is, as you can see, that the bottom two levels are more basic questions, if you like. You just want students to list things and to summarise their basic understanding of something, and then as it moves up, we're talking about how would you apply this, or in what situations is this information relevant, and then you move up towards getting into critique and create things. So if you've not come across Bloom before, or you have but you've forgotten this taxonomy, I'd urge you to have a look at it again. It's a fantastic way to differentiate between different types of students' ability, particularly on level in relation to ability level, and it's a great reminder in different ways to question students. So I'm just going to share some, obviously differentiation is a big topic, and you guys are all from different backgrounds and got different job roles, so obviously I can't differentiate my stuff about differentiation as well as I'd like to. So I've just included hopefully some really useful core principles and one or two ideas about differentiation, so you can maybe have a conversation with me afterwards or another time if this is an area you want to expand on in more detail. So as I've done 2 or 3 times now, I'll just leave that up just for 30 seconds or so if you have a read through on your own, and then I'll talk around some of these areas.
Some super things in there, Bob, as well, and just from the feedback we're getting there, it does seem like the Bloom is still very popular. At least to know.
He's blooming brilliant, mate. Yeah. The reason I sort of just put that little caveat on it is because sometimes I do go into organisations, and if I mention Bloom, I do often get groans, but not because there's anything wrong with it, just because a lot of organisations have been bloomed to death, but that doesn't mean it's not an excellent way of thinking about questioning in terms and differentiating.
Absolutely. Good stuff.
I'm going to run through this slide, and then that's the main sort of content that I was going to focus on. So if anyone's got any questions at this time or wants to come in, then that'd be fantastic to share your own questioning style or your own differentiation strategies. That would be really, really helpful. So I'm going to run. So the first one's up the top left. Probably doesn't need any expansion. That sometimes we can give students different deadlines, especially if they've been absent or they're struggling to catch up a bit. That can be one way to differentiate with students. The second one, now I've done lots of lesson observations in my time and work-based learning observations, and when there are learning support assistants, support workers in the room, one of the benchmarks I think of an excellent and outstanding lesson, outstanding learning situation is where the main teacher trainer works really well with the support workers, and when it works well, it's obvious the support workers have got a clear understanding of what their objectives are for that session. They're working with specific students, and when it's badly done, I've seen, maybe the teacher explaining something to the class as a whole, and the support assistants maybe talking to individual students, and that's distracting other students around them, or there's no prior communication between the two. The teacher, and I'm not blaming either party. Sometimes it can be the support work can be really well intentioned, but the main teacher isn't facilitating these conversations, or vice versa. So I'm not attributing blame, but when that works well, it's fantastic. When it doesn't, we're not really taking an opportunity of differentiating and supporting different types of learners, losers, I said, learners. Clearly, we can have different types of follow-up work, so you can have mandatory homework tasks, but also, and this is where particularly distance e-learning and access to support materials out of class can be particularly helpful. So we have the core work. All the students, all the learners, all the apprentices have to do certain tasks out of class. Whether they do or not is a different issue, but we set tasks. But it is important to give certain students the opportunity to extend their learning, to access different resources. And part of that is about us doing a little bit of our homework. So if you know that there's an exhibition, I mean, Marek was at a technology exhibition last couple of days, weren't you, Marek? So just making the people you work with aware of stuff going on outside of class, of TV programs, of websites, current issues that are maybe not the core element of the student study program, but it's something that can add to it, can enhance and enrich what it is they're learning. Another great way is to give students responsibilities within their sessions. So the example I give there, peer mentoring. So if someone is clearly at a more, for whatever reason, more advanced level of learning than other students in the class, then it can be great to invite them in a structured way to support others. You might just say, go and help your mate, or you might actually work with that other student for 5 minutes or so first, and maybe suggest to them how they can work with other students. So you're developing their questioning skills, their mentoring skills, and they're enjoying working with others in a more supportive way. Assessment criteria, we can sometimes give students access to the criteria, and we can give people a nudge and say, really you ought to be aiming for the distinction criteria here on this task. You can either do it explicitly, or you can allow the students to choose which criteria to focus on, and have a quiet word in people's ear and say, come on, you're looking at the pass criteria here, but there's no reason why you couldn't achieve a distinction if you do A, B, and C. Another thing I've seen that works really well is where the learners are on a particular course. It might be a level 2 course. The example I give, I saw this recently in a hairdressing class. It was a level 2 class, but some of the students clearly were working at a higher level, so they were being asked, they were not just explicitly, they were being said, this is a level 3 task, you've been doing really well so far, have a go at this. So that gives them a confidence boost, knowing that they're working at a high level, and it's a good way to differentiate. Choice generally, this is where Bloom can come in really handy. We can have some students are summarizing things, and others are doing higher level Bloom's tasks like applying things or critiquing knowledge, information, processes, whatever we're focusing on in that particular class. One thing we forget sometimes, so I think so far most of us probably are aware of the bullet points to the left, but sometimes we don't differentiate in terms of skills. So we do it in terms of students' ability or perceived ability, but we don't necessarily think about, because you might have someone who's incredibly bright, who's very committed, who wants to work hard and work out of class, but maybe they don't have the study skills to do that. The note-making skills, the skimming and scanning skills, time management, organisational, whatever those skills are, we could do a lot of support for students by making sure that we're aware of who's got what skills, and that we support students in that area. I mean, note making's a big thing that I see a lot working in organisations, that students just don't make good notes. So however committed and keen they are, you know, good notes could be using phones, dictaphones, how to summarise information, how to use mind maps, and there's all sorts of ways that we can support students with their study skills. Obviously targets, sometimes we make the mistake, and by the way, Sally Wotton, I don't know if you've noticed yet, but she's doing a webinar, and might want to say more about that at the end. She's doing a webinar just on target setting, mainly aimed at the pastoral side, but it's just as relevant, I would suggest to you, for teachers, trainers, assessors, and our various roles. So really, you know, today we're talking about questioning, we're talking about verbal feedback, and it's often unclear sometimes whether staff can distinguish between an assessment criteria or an overall objective, which is a sort of statement of intent, what we want students to be able to do, and a specific target, which is often about small steps, it's about specific behaviours. So that can be a barrier to differentiation if we're not doing it well, and it can be a really sort of enhanced differentiation where we crystal clear in our own minds about not just how to set targets, but how to make them compelling and how to work with students. So I mentioned out of class learning earlier. One of my pet favourites that some of you have heard me say before is YouTube. As one, there'll be other ways, and you'll have probably more up-to-date ways mainly, but I just hardly any teachers, trainers, managers, assessors that I work with use YouTube to its full effect. Students are never off YouTube. It's a massive, second biggest search engine in the world. There's some great materials on there already in terms of knowledge, in terms of skills, processes, and it's dead easy. It takes you 5 minutes to set up a YouTube channel and to, you know, transfer over other little YouTube clips that are going to support your students into your own area. And that's a great way to differentiate. So you've got the core materials that students access, the core homework tasks, the mandatory things, and also you've got a growing bank of other materials that the curious students, the self-motivated ones will access. And sometimes we don't necessarily want to direct them to our YouTube channel, we want them to do their own research, but other times we do want to have a bit of quality control and filter them into your own area. This last one, when often, you know, I'm drawing on my experience, I do a lot of work in colleges and training organisations about differentiation, and everyone knows about ability. So if I'm delivering a session and you say, how can you differentiate, people say you put the same ability students together sometimes, and they can have a more challenging task or less so, and sometimes you mix the ability, so you want more able students to work with less able. So I think that's valid, and that's a good thing to do sometimes, but sometimes we don't actually know who's able and who isn't. You know, we sometimes confuse extroverts with ability. People who are confident and outgoing and expressive, we sometimes think, oh, they're keen and they've got ability, and the quiet, shy ones, we maybe assume that they don't know anything because they're not saying anything. But that's clearly not always the case. There's no correlation between introversion and intelligence. I'm speaking as an introvert myself, even though I do this job, and it doesn't mean that you're not confident and can't be funny now and again and you're not comfortable in group situations. It just means that you have a different way of processing information. Introverts like to internally reflect first and then, you know, maybe share with others. Extroverts tend to have an idea and put it out there and then gauge the response. So think about when we're talking about working with groups and differentiating, think about mixing people up in terms of their introvert, extrovert, in terms of their mindset. You know, some students have a growth mindset where they're prepared to step out of the comfort zone, where they're prepared to try things and make mistakes. Other students less so. And again, we're not talking about ability. You can have a fixed mindset. You can think, well, I'm good at some things, but I'm not good at others, and still be really talented and really skilled at things. So we differentiate in terms of completers, starters. Some people have a lot of ideas and make a start, and then their energy wanes for whatever reason. Other people are much more see things through to their conclusion. And sometimes the starters might be very innovative and creative and ideas people and bright, but they just, for whatever reason, don't see things through. So you might differentiate in group work by putting two types of people together. And so on. I mean, I could have listed small chunkers and big chunkers. Some people like details and are very good on process. Some people are, like to know the big picture before they move on. So, there's lots more within each of these areas that we could look at, but I just wanted to give an overview of maybe one or two of these bullet points of things you haven't thought of for a while or at all, and hopefully you've got some food for thought there now in terms of differentiation. So I'm just going to wrap up in about a minute too. There's contact details. If you want a no strings conversation, and I mean that sounds a bit salesy, but I mean that genuinely. If there's anything you want to follow up, just drop me an email or phone call. If there's any way that I can maybe work with your organisation, then I'd love to do that. That's what I do basically, try to help organisations to focus on small changes that can be implemented straight away rather than grand theories and principles where nothing ever happens. So I'm just going to finish off there. Maybe Marek, if you want to come in, if there's any feedback or questions, or anyone else wants to come in there. Hello, anybody there?
Sorry about delay there, Bob. I was just responding to some of the participants there via the keyboard at the same time as trying to reach across and hit the microphone button there. Oh, that was superb. Thank you very much. Again, some really good feedback that's been coming through here. There's I think among the participants, we've just been having a little bit of a discussion, also a bit of a recommendation. They've been coming up on a few of the other types of programs, like the TED Talks, which I know you're a fan of as well, Bob. And there's some of the participants are still using. Obviously, the BBC Bite-sized stuff's still very good.
Yeah.
So, and these are just some of the other resources which are available, and the thing is that they really are just at the end of the fingertips, really, by typing away, and really accessible, and they do the trick. Any other thoughts or anything else anyone would like to add? Any thoughts to Bob on the content as well? Anything else? I've really found, again, I found the session useful once again myself, Bob. So I know that I'm going to be taking away quite a few points to be diving into as well.
If anyone's got any, as well as questions about the content, I would welcome any feedback, whether you think I rushed through anything or I could have spent longer, because I'm doing this webinar again this afternoon, and if I can make a few adjustments myself on the basis of your comments, I'd really welcome those as well.
No, I think like what Svetlana is just saying there. Oh, don't worry about the spelling there, Svetlana. I'll tell you something. I'm awful when it comes to typing on these keyboards anyway. But no, we're getting feedback that it was a nicely compacted session that as well. And June, you're also a fan of bite size. Yeah, get stuck in and have a look at these. Have a chat with Bob as well, because he really does know where to go and look for the different resources as well for some of the different areas. So it's certainly worth chatting with about that. Do you list any of the areas on your site, Bob? I can't remember.
Well, you've hit a bit of an issue there, I've been talking to my site needs reviewing, to be honest, so not at the moment. I mean, I've got a YouTube channel that I put, there's about 30 clips on there to do with things like motivation, mindset. There's one or two bits about differentiation, I think. So if you go onto Bob Craig Learning and Development, go onto YouTube and then Bob Craig Learning and Development,
I can add the direct link as well when I send the video recording out to you, the participants, and I'll send Bob's YouTube channel link there for a bit of a heads up from you, and that. But again, the feedback is you know, in terms of the pace as well. Thanks for that, Donna. That's super. Yeah, I think it's quite concise, Bob, as well, which is cool. So I think it was a nicely delivered session in the 45. In fact, you were right on the button with the 45 minutes as well. What's the issue there, Bob?
Look, I think, Marek.
Thanks for the feedback there as well, Svetlana. But yeah, so what I'll do is I'll just stop the